Sounds good. My man's Brady at DFS underscore numbers on Twitter. We are back for an interesting, funny. I guess the one quirk on this slate is that don't play Pittsburgh, Tennessee guys. Interesting slate. Outside of that, wipe those guys off your boards. How did Week 3 treat you? Did you learn anything that you think will be useful for Week 4?
Yeah, I learned that Josh Allen is indeed the real deal, so can't wait to talk about him. A pretty good Week 3 for me, especially in cash. I had Allen Robinson at 6%, which was nice. I ate the chalk with Tyler Lockett. He scored like 40-something, so a pretty good week overall, ready to go into this week that you mentioned. It's a little weird. We're missing a game, and I heard like another game might get postponed as well, so going to be really an interesting slate here.
Yeah, I guess if anyone, I feel like this is one of the biggest pieces of football news outside of like the Saquon injury this year, and it's only because it's this year. Tennessee, Pittsburgh postponed because Tennessee has a COVID outbreak. The Vikings played Tennessee, and players at that time now we know they tested positive, but from all accounts I can find, the Vikings appear to be going forward. They didn't return any positive tests, so we'll go game by game and talk about some of the plays, give you our cash and tournament thoughts. Let's start with a game that's just meh. Chicago versus the Colts. Chicago 2.5-point dogs, a 43.5 point total. That total has come down a point. I don't know, man. I have had the rug pulled out from under me too many times with Nick Foles. I get it. He came in, he played well through 3 scores, but he wasn't particularly graded highly by Pro Football Focus. He still got intercepted, and we've seen this happen before. The guy has, I think, a fairly reasonable ceiling on any week, but he's, at the end of the day, he's still just Nick Foles. What's your interest level in this game? I think on the other side, Jonathan Taylor as a favorite is always interesting. Last week, that didn't pan out because he was too much of a favorite, apparently. He ended up ceding work to Jordan Wilkins by the second half because they, I believe there's 2 pick sixes that the Colts defense got. You don't really need to play your second round, star running back when you're up 20 to 30 points. Do you think that happens this week? Are you going back to the Jonathan Taylor well after getting pretty fairly burned if you did play him last week?
Yeah, I'll probably go back to some Jonathan Taylor. I mean, Colts defense went off. They had like 2 touchdowns, and it was crazy. I had Colts defense in my cash lineup all week and then finally took him out last second. So that kind of sucked. They absolutely went off. I think they had like 20-something points. But yeah, Taylor only 13 attempts, 59 yards. But a lot of that was because he wasn't on offense yet, and there was a big blowout. So I think I'm going to go back to him this week. Hopefully he's a little bit lower owned against Chicago, who isn't all that great. On the Bears side of the ball, Nick Foles, I'm not going to go there. There's so many other plays for quarterback in this 5,000 range that we'll talk about. So I just don't really see the need to go to Nick Foles against a pretty solid Colts defense here. Other than that, Robinson's someone who I really like pretty much every single week for the volume he gets. I played him last week in cash at 6%, like I mentioned, 31 points, 13 targets, 10 receptions. So he's always interesting. And then Jimmy Graham is somebody who's really interesting. 3,800. Nick Foles threw the ball to him a ton. He had 10 targets. So if he's going to continue to get that volume, I don't think Jimmy Graham's a bad play at all this week.
Yeah, I don't hate it. It might sound gross, but Jimmy Graham, he's not been bad. He's got, like you said, he had those scores. He scored again. He's playing on a majority of the receiving snaps. If you're looking at this game, I think there are worse plays you could talk about. And in terms of the Jonathan Taylor splits, Jonathan Taylor since week 2, because we saw Marlon Mack go down week 1 with, I believe it was the Achilles tear, but he did have some playing time. So since week 2, when Jonathan Taylor was the starter, only seeing 56% of the overall running back carries out of the backfield on the team. When you chop that to just the first half, because they have killed both of their opponents, 75% of the running back carries, as long as they don't absolutely boat race Chicago, which it could happen, but as long as that doesn't happen, or at least that's not the projection, Jonathan Taylor is absolutely the man. Not a ton of receiving work last week. It was really that week 1 6 target, 6 catch game that was giving us promise. Haven't quite seen that, so I do think you need them to be winning to really feel comfortable with Taylor, but that's what Vegas has them at this week. I'm not really sold on Chicago as a team. I know they're undefeated, but it's come on a number of unlikely circumstances. So I'm going to say I actually like going back to the Taylor well this week. Let's see what we have up next. We have interesting tournament game potentially. Tampa Bay versus the Chargers. Tampa Bay, 7.5 point favorites. It's a pretty large spread, a 43.5 point total. My only concern is that total has been coming down since the line opened. Any interest in, now we have Tampa Bay, almost certainly I think he hasn't been ruled out quite yet, but without a doubt playing without Chris Godwin. Mike Evans, even when it doesn't happen for him, it happens for him last week. You got Mike Evans, Chris Godwin goes down, and you're thinking, I am just jamming it in. And then you see 2 targets, 2 catches. What a shame. And he scores on both of them inexplicably. Are we jamming in Mike Evans, sans Chris Godwin, and potentially even Scott Miller, who's right now, I believe, questionable heading into week 4? Is Mike Evans just onslaught this week?
Yeah, I'm really interested in Mike Evans with Godwin doubtful. I don't think he's going to play. So Evans at 6,400 with Godwin's out. It just seems like an absolute gift. So I will go there in a lot of lineups. And like you mentioned, Scotty Miller, he is questionable. If he does play 4,100, that's not a bad play. Not a bad play for a punt. Other than that, on the Chargers side of the ball, I mean, you don't really want to play running backs against this Tampa Bay run defense. I know Eckler can catch the ball, and he did fantastic last week. He had like 30 points, but that was against one of the worst run defenses in the NFL in Carolina. So not too interested actually in anything from the Chargers side of the ball. I guess Hunter Henry as a tight end is interesting, 4,600, 7 targets week 3, 8 targets week 1 and 2. So the targets are there. The price isn't bad against a Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, which is actually not that bad. But really for me, just probably Mike Evans, and that's, pretty much it.
I feel similarly. I am concerned with Justin Herbert in his 3rd start. I'm not sure if that his first game counts as a start. I don't know exactly what that was chalked up as with Tyrod Taylor, attempted to be assassinated by a doctor. I'm not sure if I'm looking excited about the Chargers with an implied team total of just 18. That's quite low for a slate where we have a ton of awesome shootouts. I believe he's on the road. Tampa Bay's defense, quite solid. I'm concerned with going with any Chargers. So I think maybe this is just a spot where you look at the easy play. Don't get cute. Play Mike Evans. He's a great play when Chris Godwin's out. And then move on. The next game, though, has a lot of fantasy potential. I think people recognize that. It's not contrarian to say that Dallas versus Cleveland, 4.5-point favorites Dallas are, and a stunning 56-point total. It's not contrarian to say this game is going to be good. But you haven't had to be super contrarian in the past few weeks to take down the Millie Maker, to take down big tournaments. Because last week, the game that everyone wanted to get on, Russell Wilson versus Dak Prescott, the game smashed. Russell Wilson was chalky, and he perfectly hit. You talked about it. Tyler Lockett, even DK Metcalf, all end up getting theirs. Is this another spot where you just say, screw the chalk? This is a spot where I don't care if people recognize that Dallas is good. I'm just going to go over the field on them. Dallas has been incredible. Dak Prescott, I believe, 1,118 yards, top 5 all-time through 5 weeks. He's playing well. He's getting to drop back a ton of times per game. I believe he leads the NFL in pass attempts. Are you fine with eating a little bit of chalk and just playing the good plays in Dallas?
Yeah, I'm definitely fine with eating the chalk. Like last week, that Seattle game was very, very chalky, and then you had to eat that chalk with Lockett, scored like 40-something points. And it seems like Dallas and whoever Dallas plays just seems to have a very good day in fantasy, 56-point total, highest total on the slate in this game. I'm very interested in both sides of the ball here, actually. I mean, Baker Mayfield at 5,800, as ugly as it seems, like these quarterbacks have been killing Dallas. So 5,800, he has all the weapons. He hasn't been able to do it yet this year, but what better matchup than this Dallas defense? Zeke Elliott on the Dallas side, he's going to get that volume. There's a lot of great options at running back, so I don't think you necessarily have to plug in Zeke. There's somebody I like a little bit better this week, but I think Zeke's a fine play. And then you got the Dallas receivers. You can pretty much, play any. You can make a case for any of them, like Amari Cooper, Lamb, even Schultz at tight end. They're all going to get a ton of volume. Dak has been fantastic so far this year from a fantasy perspective. And on the Cleveland side, I guess I'm pretty interested in Odell Beckham Jr. at 5,800. It just seems like way too cheap for, somebody the caliber of Odell Beckham Jr. And the volume is there. 6 targets in week 3, 6 targets in week 2, 10 in week 1. And the points, they'll about average 10.8 per game, but you are expecting more from Odell Beckham Jr. And I mean, he has a really good matchup here against Dallas. So this is the one week where I think he should be able to have a very, very good week here. He's 5,800. I'm assuming he's going to be lowish owned. I'm assuming he's going to have some ownership, but he hasn't really got anything going this year. And this could be a kind of a breakout game for Odell.
Yeah, I love that call. You hit on all the points, so I won't really go in too deep. But Odell Beckham, top 10 in target share, top 10 in air yard share. He is still the Odell Beckham that we know and love, We just haven't had to see the Cleveland offense really really air it out completely. That hasn't happened yet versus a Dallas offense that is sick and a Dallas defense that is not. It's a great spot for Odell Beckham to finally hit big, and then you probably fade him for the next few weeks because he won't be playing Dallas in a game where we know Cleveland wants to run the ball. They want to establish it, man. They got 2 great running backs, and they want to use them. Even Odell himself, I think it was before last week, said he's probably not a guy you want to play in fantasy. He knows the system they're running. This is a week that could change. He's a guy I'm not excited about for the entire length of the season, but this week is a great week for Odell Beckham. On the other side, CeeDee Lamb looks healthy. He was actually the reason Cedric Wilson ended up scoring twice was because CeeDee Lamb hardly played towards the end of the game. I think he got his ankle rolled. It was a pretty scary roll up, but I think I saw somewhere that he was a full participant in practice potentially. I've seen no reports that he won't be healthy going into this week, so I think you just stay tried and true. You go with the top 3 of mixing up. If you're playing multiple lineups, I'm playing Dak Prescott with guaranteed Amari Cooper. And if I have 2 lineups with Dak Prescott, one of them is Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup. One of them is Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. Not getting too cute there. I think the Odell Beckham run back is enough differentiation for me. The next game, I'm interested to hear your take on this. Baltimore, 13-point favorites. That is insane, but they play Washington, so it's not surprising. Washington, terrible. Will be without Chase Young, should really face no resistance. They just won't be able to put up a fight versus Baltimore based on this line and based on everything we've seen outside of a difficult Monday Night Football game for the Ravens. What do you make of a spot like this where the Ravens are going to be low owned? I've seen multiple single-digit projections for Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews. The running backs aren't getting any love. They've got a 29.5 implied team total, but the game sets up for one that we see RG3 in almost the entirety of the fourth quarter. Do you factor that in at all, the fact that you really are not going to get much resistance from Washington, or do you like the ownership or the lack of ownership we see on the Baltimore side?
I mean, typically I'd be pretty interested because Lamar and the Ravens had a pretty poor game on Monday night. Everybody saw that, so you're right. They're going to be very low owned. It's just there's so many great plays up in this quarterback range in the 8,000s. I don't think you necessarily have to go Lamar Jackson unless you really want to be different, and I do expect him to definitely bounce back against Washington, but like you mentioned, 13-point favorites. What if they get out too far and they start being conservative and running the ball? I just don't really think I'm going to go there, but I can definitely understand if you do want to get different. I'm just not too excited to play this game as a whole. I do think the Ravens are going to probably smash here. If anything, there is one play on Washington I like, and that is Logan Thomas at 3,500. They actually priced him down a little bit from last week, and I think he's 3rd in tight end targets, 7 targets in week 3, 9 in week 2, 8 in week 1, averaging 9.1 points. The volume is there in a game that they should be trailing, should be throwing a lot, possible garbage time. I really do like Thomas there. Logan Thomas at 3,500. I just think it's way too cheap for the volume that he gets week in and week out. And I'm really confused why they're not pricing him up. I know the results really haven't been there, but the volume definitely is. So I do think there's some upside there for that. Other than that, I guess Ravens defense, if you want to pay up 4,000, I don't think I think they'll have a pretty solid day against this Washington team.
Yeah, I think you hit on all the plays. One more that I will add. I like the Logan Thomas call, but on the other side, there's another great tight end. I don't know if we can call Logan Thomas great, but the volume is great for him. Honestly, the volume is incredible. I believe it was 8, 9, and 7, you said, have been his target totals. That's incredible for a tight end. Obviously, it's top 5, you said, and I believe it. Who else are they going to throw to? Scary Terry is awesome. They have nobody else. I think even Steven Sims was a guy that I was kind of excited for, has essentially been relegated to the bench. They have nobody you can feel good about outside of Terry McLaurin. So Logan Thomas stepping up in a way that has not yet produced fantasy points, but the volume has been there. On the other side, Mark Andrews, much more expensive, but he's a tight end. He's a premium talent at tight end attached to one of the best touchdown throwing quarterbacks in the league in Lamar Jackson. He's $6K, so he's expensive, but he's not quite up in that Travis Kelce tier, and he's going to be a fraction of the ownership of Travis Kelce. I'm seeing 3 to 4% ownership for Mark Andrews, whereas Kelce is going to be one of the most popular tight ends on the slate. I think it's an interesting pivot. I'm probably not looking to game stack this game. When I typically look at a game stack, I want 2 teams battling. I don't want a team steamrolling the other team, because that's not the fantasy environment I'm looking for. There are other fantasy environments that we can target, one of them being the Cardinals versus Teddy Bridgewater and the Carolina Panthers. Panthers 3.5-point underdogs, a 51-point total. There are a lot of totals north of 50 this week, so it's not something special at this point to see a 51-point total. Are you interested in Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins? One thing I have to say before I let you take over on this game, DeAndre Hopkins is basically just new Michael Thomas. And he might just be Michael Thomas because I don't know how Michael Thomas is going to fare with this new look Drew Brees, this old dusty look Drew Brees. He's the closest thing we have to 2019 Michael Thomas. And he's right now, I'm seeing ownership projections for under 5%. I get he's expensive, but you are getting everything you paid for and more when you roster DeAndre Hopkins. Are you going back to the DeAndre Hopkins well this week? And do you feel the need to stack him with Murray?
Yeah, I'll probably be going here a lot this year. I mean, Hopkins is someone who's really, showed up this year. 16 targets in week 1, 9 targets in week 2, 12 targets in week 3. He leads all wide receivers with the targets. And Murray's somebody I'm going to talk about pretty much every single week. He's 7,000. You're getting a nice discount on some of those higher priced quarterbacks there. 24 points last week, 33 week 2, 27 week 1. He has that rushing yard floor that I really like in cash games. Lots of touchdown upside on a very high point total. So the Murray Hopkins stack is something I'm going to look at probably, most weeks, especially against Carolina, who, does not have a very good defense by any means. And the play that really intrigues me, and I'm really curious to see how owned Kenyon Drake is going to be, because he has, really underperformed and screwed a lot of people, especially last week, and including me. 8.9 points last week, 18 attempts, only 1 reception. I just don't get it. The volume is there. Everything is there for Kenyon Drake to succeed in this really good offense. But the thing is, he's playing Carolina, which is probably the worst run defense in the NFL. If he can't do it this week, then I really don't know. He is 6,000 on DraftKings, way too cheap for the potential that Drake brings. And I really hope people look at his game last week and see, 8.9 points. I'm not going to plug him in because I'm very, very high on Drake. I'm going to be playing him in cash. I'm going to be playing him in tournaments, and hopefully his ownership is not as high as I do expect it to be, because I do think he's going to smash against a Carolina rushing defense that is absolutely awful.
Yeah, on the Cardinals side, Kyler Murray right now at 7K, his rushing floor is just so incredible. Last week was his worst week of the season as a rusher in terms of yardage, only 29 yards, but he's found the end zone in every single game, and he found the end zone twice 2 weeks ago. He is probably, given that we have seen situations like the Seahawks and Russell Wilson get up to an early lead and put him on the bench, essentially just let him hand off, that is very much possible against Miami this week, that Chris Carson, or if it's not Chris Carson, Carlos Hyde, punches in 1 or 2 short ones, and then they just kind of take it easy, because you do want to take it easy with Russell Wilson in the sense of, if you're up by 21 against Miami, which is very possible, no need to trot out your quarterback, dropping back and, potentially risking an injury by getting sacked or just rolling out. So I wouldn't blame them for doing that. Whereas on the Kyler Murray front, I cannot envision a scenario in which he doesn't get there. Last week, he played particularly poorly, and he still got there in terms of fantasy points because of his rushing. He is, outside of Lamar Jackson, the best rusher in the NFL, and you don't have to pay Lamar Jackson prices for him. So he's a guy who, until I get his price way up there, I'll keep going back to in cash. On the other side, DJ Moore I don't think he's scored yet. He's a guy who's kind of struggled with touchdown production throughout his career. But in terms of the usage, it has all been there. We've seen some Robbie Anderson, but DJ Moore is still leading the team, I believe, in air yards and targets. Once touchdown regression hits, he is going to smash, but his ownership is quite high. I think maybe Mike Davis, who also is going to have a decent amount of ownership, is a decent enough pivot. I'm not sure how confident I feel in jamming in the Carolina side of things. Teddy Bridgewater has played okay, but I don't think he's anything special. And because the Cardinals run a decent amount with Kenyon Drake, and they throw to DeAndre Hopkins, who's catching almost all of his passes, they chew up the clock pretty well. They haven't had a team get a crazy high total of plays run against them. They haven't had a team, I believe, top 65 or 70 plays against them. Their games aren't necessarily prone to shooting out because of the way they play. So I think I would limit myself to just 1 run back. I'm not doing double run backs. And for me, that's Mike Davis, 17 targets in essentially 1.5 games without Christian McCaffrey. He's 5,700 on DraftKings. He's going to be chalky. And given the volume we've seen, I'm just eating that chalk and moving on. Let's look at our next game. We have Drew Brees. I'm not sure if he's the Drew Brees we know and love anymore, but he is still a 4.5 point favorite on the road versus the Lions. Still gets to play indoors. 4.5 point favorites, 54 point total. Are you concerned at all with what you've seen from Drew Brees? As far as I can tell through 3 weeks, the dude is he's getting, I don't want to say worse every year because he hasn't been particularly bad until this year, but he might have just hit the cliff. No player can play forever. Has Drew Brees hit the cliff?
Yeah, I think he might have, but a lot of that is because, no Michael Thomas doesn't really help his case, but I get what you're saying. He has not looked the best, but I think Michael Thomas should be playing this week. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think he logged a full practice, and he was maybe up in the running to play last week, but they decided to take it safe. A full practice, or at least a limited practice, might have been full. I would bet almost anything he plays this week, barring some absurd setback.
Yeah, I think he plays too. And at 7,600, it's just weird seeing Michael Thomas like priced this so low at 7,600. For the upside he's going to bring. Of course, there is the concern about the injury, and he's going to be 100%. Had that same concern about Kenny Golladay last week. Coming off of an injury, he scored like 17 points. So I think this is going to be the last time we see Thomas at 7,600. So I'm probably going to take advantage of that in some tournament lineups. I don't think I'm going to go there in cash. A play that we really have to talk about, and that is Alvin Kamara. He had 47.7 DraftKings points against Green Bay. 6 rushing attempts, 58 yards, but he did have 14 targets and 13 receptions. So he's going to get a lot of targets regardless, but Michael Thomas being back, I do think he's not going to get like 14 targets, but I do think he'll still get around the 10 target range, which is big for DFS. You want guys that can catch the ball. So Kamara is somebody I really, really like in cash games, in tournament games. I think he has tons and tons of upside. On the Lions side of the ball, I think Matthew Stafford's very cheap. He's someone that actually throws the ball quite a bit. 31 attempts in week 3, 33 in week 2, and 42 in week 1. So, the volume is there for Matthew Stafford at 5,900, and he has his favorite target back in Kenny Golladay. Golladay did really good on his first week back. I had some of them last week against Arizona. He had 7 targets, 6 receptions, 57 yards, and a touchdown. So don't hate Matthew Stafford at that price in a game that should be very high scoring. And I also think it's going to be very low owned off those high owned quarterbacks up top. And other than that, just I guess Detroit, their tight end Hawkinson is a good play here. 7 targets in week 3, 4 in week 2, and 5 in week 1. Been very efficient so far, averaging 12 points per game at 4,800. But really like Kamara, probably going to go there in cash, as a lot of people probably are. Matthew Stafford maybe in some tournament lineups. Pairing it with Golladay, probably running it back with Kamara or Michael Thomas.
Yeah, I like that. I agree with your point on Michael Thomas. Last year we were talking about 8K, too cheap for Michael Thomas, playing him at 8K. If he gets up to 9K, that seems like quite a reasonable price. Is he a guy who we should be looking at paying 10K for? Right now his price is not even close to that. He's just simply, unless Drew Brees absolutely has nothing left in the tank, he is going to come up in price in the following weeks. Right now, you can both buy him at a discount in terms of his price, and his ownership is projected to be fairly reasonable as well. I think sub 10% basically. So I'm totally fine going to Michael Thomas, whether or not I'm stacking this game or not really. I think Michael Thomas is just a great play. Next game, Bengals versus Jacksonville. Bengals are 3-point favorites, a total that has come up monstrously, opened at 44.5 and is now at 49. I think my only concern with this game is that I don't feel confident that if the Bengals do end up winning, that Jacksonville can compete from behind. We saw in the first 2 weeks, Gardner Minshew played quite well. He ended up netting them 1 win in those 2 weeks. Then he plays Miami, and it seems like the only way he gets there is essentially having an efficient dink and dunk game. You can't play that game style if you're going to be losing. They had no chance of coming back versus Miami because Gardner Minshew was not going downfield. If we don't see DJ Chark on the field, which is very possible this week, dealing with a chest injury, I believe, and that is just another reason that they are going to struggle to keep up with the Bengals team that, although they haven't, I think they're 0-2-1, they haven't notched that win yet. They're at least playing fast and throwing the ball a ton. So I like the Bengals side. I like T. Higgins, a young ascending player, top of the 2nd round pick, scored 2 touchdowns last week on 9 targets. Tyler Boyd got 13 targets, monstrous game for him. I don't know how I feel about any of the guys on the other side. Is this a game that piques your interest at all?
Yeah, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm kind of interested in this Bengals side here. I mean, starting with Joe Burrow, it's kind of interesting. 6,300. The volume that he's been bringing this year is like unreal. 44 attempts in week 3, 51 in week 2, 36 in week 1. All the volume in the world is there, and he seems to have been getting it together a little bit last week, and he has a really good matchup here against Jacksonville. I mean, in week 3, he played Philadelphia. In week 2, Cleveland. And week 1, the Chargers. So this is going to be his easiest matchup yet. And it's really hard to, decide which wide receiver you want to pair him with if you do go there. Tyler Boyd is someone who did get a ton of targets last week. It seems like everybody gets a ton of targets every week on this Bengals offense. But A.J. Green at 5,500 just has not been producing. I was expecting bigger things from him. 8.6 points last week, 5.9 the week before that. But like you mentioned, Higgins at 4,500, way too cheap. 9 targets last week, 5 receptions, 21 points. I think is a fine option too. pair with Burrow if you do want to go there. It's not the prettiest play in the world, but when you're throwing the ball like 40, 50 times, it's kind of interesting from a DFS perspective. On the Jaguars side, honestly, not too interested in anything here. I guess Robinson at running back, they did price him up a decent amount. They priced him up at like 1,100. Just going to stay away from the Jaguars side. If anything, take some shots on some Bengals just for that volume, but really not interested in this game as a whole.
Yeah, the game is okay. The Bengals, second most pass attempts in the league. That's fun, but Burrow hasn't been incredibly efficient through 3 weeks. He's not Dak Prescott. He's not Russell Wilson. So his pass attempts come at somewhat of a discount relative to a Dak Prescott or, other more efficient players who just aren't throwing quite as much. Let's move on to Houston versus Minnesota. Houston has struggled through 3 weeks, to say the least. They played somewhat well against Pittsburgh, but couldn't pull off the win. It was the best fantasy point outing and the first one over 20 for Deshaun Watson. The first 2 games against stout defenses in Kansas City, who looks like their defense is improving again right now, based on the way they played Lamar Jackson, and versus Baltimore and Lamar Jackson himself. Deshaun Watson couldn't get it going. Is this just a string of bad defenses that can even stop a guy like Watson, or is maybe the loss of Hopkins maybe more of a factor than people are really realizing? Do you think he gets right against Minnesota?
Yeah, I mean, we got to look at who he played. Kansas City, their defense has been looking pretty solid. Baltimore has a really solid defense. And of course, Pittsburgh, one of the best defenses in the league. So he hasn't had the best matchups. And, you're going against Minnesota here, which is not the best defense whatsoever, especially, against wide receivers. I do think that he can have a good week here at 6,600. It seems really, really cheap. And especially getting off some of that chalk up top from some of those higher priced quarterbacks there. So Watson definitely does draw my interest in a favorable matchup here against the Vikings. Will Fuller at 5,900 in week 2 did not have a target. In week 3, bounced back 5 targets, 4 receptions, did have a touchdown, scoring 15.4 DraftKings points. And at 5,900, that's something that really intrigues me against a Minnesota defense that has not looked all that great this year, to say the least. So Watson and Fuller combo is something I'm really looking at. And I also think David Johnson at 5,600 is pretty cheap here against a good matchup here. 13 attempts in week 3, 11 in week 2 and 1. He's also getting like 3-4 targets a game. 5,600 is not a bad option there. Other than that, on the Minnesota side, not too interested. I know Jefferson had a really good week last week. Dalvin Cook at 7,600. I think this is a really good matchup for him. He's going to get those 20-plus carries. I had 181 yards last week against Tennessee, so he's more than capable of going off on any given week. But mostly for me, I'll take a shot at a Watson Fuller stack. I think it's going to be really low owned. I don't know who I'm going to run it back with. Jefferson, Thielen, I don't know.
Yeah, I think I'll add 2 things. One, Brandon Cooks seeing a very healthy amount of targets himself on this team. I believe he's tied with Will Fuller in targets and very similar air yards numbers as well. I think if you want to double stack, we have seen so many teams just hand it to this terrible Viking secondary. On the other side, Adam Thielen doesn't really do much on 5 targets last week. I think he ends up scoring, so it's not a complete bust, but it wasn't a very good game for Thielen in terms of the raw volume. That kind of happens when Justin Jefferson absolutely goes berserk. To 2 weeks before that, 16 targets between the 2 games for Thielen. He'd be the guy I would clearly look to run it back with. I don't think you have to run it back because we could just see Deshaun Watson in a get-right spot absolutely hand it to this terrible Viking secondary. It's amazing how far they've come in terms of losing all their talent, all their players turning bad compared to an awesome Viking secondary from a few years ago. I would say for me, David Johnson projecting as one of the chalkiest plays to the slate. I think he makes sense in cash. His backfield market share numbers are absolutely insane. They're really not going to give it to anyone else. Duke Johnson could return, but I don't think his role is going to be very much, if at all. Didn't play much in week 1, hasn't played since. So I'm going to say David Johnson is a guy I'm fine with fading the ownership in tournaments, but in cash, I get why you'd go there. This next game is a doozy. Seattle versus Miami, the lowly Miami Dolphins. Come up with a win last week, but it was against one of the worst teams in the NFL, Jacksonville. This week, they are 6.5-point dogs at home, a 52.5-point total. Total has come down a bit, opened at 54, now it's down. But man, Russell Wilson is freaking cooking. We knew this could happen all along. That one, we knew if Russell Wilson was unleashed, he would be incredible. And we knew that it was possible. They talked about it throughout the summer. Russell Wilson even said that he wants to play more like they play in the fourth quarter in the first 3 quarters. And now we're getting that. Russell Wilson has been absolutely dominant, clearly the front runner to be the MVP and could be the fantasy MVP too. And I think the most important point is that when you play a Russell Wilson stack, you're not trying to figure out which of his 4 to 5 pass catching options it is. I like Dak Prescott, but it is difficult when you have to say, is it a Dalton Schultz week? Is it an Amari Cooper week? Is it a Michael Gallup week after he busted for 2 weeks? And I think Cedric Wilson mostly just got there because CeeDee Lamb was hurt. But it is difficult when you can't know exactly that even if you get the Dak Prescott call right, you might not get the receivers right. Not the case here. Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, the only 2 guys I'm really looking at on this team. We saw both of them get there last week. Tyler Lockett absolutely smashes. I'm fine with going back to the well. And the ownership of these guys doesn't seem to be through the roof. And on the other side, I feel fairly confident that either Devontae Parker or Gesicki are the best options. Are you as excited about this game as I am? I think this is one of the better spots to play this week.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this game from, a decent amount of both sides here. Starting with Russell Wilson, he is putting up some MVP numbers so far. Last week, 40 attempts, 27 completions. He did have 315 yards, 5 touchdowns, 39.8 DraftKings points. He has been absolutely fantastic. No shame at going up and getting Russell Wilson 7,800 against a very, very poor Miami defense. I think he's definitely in play. And then Tyler Lockett is somebody I really like. And they did price him up $600, which is fine. I'm still going to play him until they price him up even more than that. But he's been fantastic as well. 13 targets last week, 9 receptions, had 40 DraftKings points. And I love to see that because I had a ton of Lockett last week. So it all worked out. It was between Lockett and Metcalf for me, and I went with the Lockett side, which definitely worked out. But, Metcalf is someone who's always in play as well. 23 DraftKings points last week for Metcalf. And I believe he fumbled the ball like the 1-yard line last week, something crazy like that I heard. Which is, that's insane. So it had like 29 points if that didn't happen. So, yeah, Metcalf is someone who's always in play. Both Lockett and Metcalf are some guys I'm looking at. On the Dolphins side, I mean, call me crazy, but Ryan Fitzpatrick at 5,400, very, very cheap here. He scored 25.2 DraftKings points in week 3 against Jacksonville, 27.32 against Buffalo. He's just really, really cheap. And in a game that's going to be very high scoring against a Seattle defense that isn't all that impressive, I kind of like the Fitzpatrick and Devontae Parker stack here. Just a very, very cheap stack. Devontae Parker himself is 5,700, 11.9 DraftKings points in week 3, 16.3 in week 2. The targets are there, 8 in week 2, 5 in week 3. I really like that stack as kind of like a cheap stack, hopefully low owned. It's something I'm going to go into tournaments. Of course, not really a cash game stack, but something I'm looking at to potentially, save some salary and go up and get some running backs I like, some receivers I like. But yeah, this is a game I'm really excited to watch. I think it's going to be a very good game from a DraftKings perspective.
Yeah, and Ryan Fitzpatrick, a guy who, while the lows are low, I don't really care about that in tournaments. Like you said, probably not a guy you're looking to in cash, but in tournaments, I don't care if he gets me last place because I know he has the potential to get me first place. And that's where all the value is. Min cashing all of your tournaments is both unlikely and unprofitable of a strategy to set out for. You're looking to get 1 first over the course of a season, and that makes up for all the times that Ryan Fitzpatrick goes out and throws 2 interceptions. If it's a 3-touchdown Ryan Fitzpatrick week, and it very well could be against a Seattle defense that has been shredded by every opponent they have played, you've got the nuts right there. If it is one of those Ryan Fitzpatrick weeks, stacking options, I feel fairly confident in. Devontae Parker is a good stacking option. Maybe you could look at some Preston Williams or Mike Gesicki. I like Gesicki over all the other guys. And then you just move on. You stack the Dolphins and make $1 million. The next game, Los Angeles versus the Giants. The lowly Giants, 13-point underdogs. What are you doing, Giants? 48.5 point total. Daniel Jones looks like what everyone thought Josh Allen was going to look like. The Rams playing well, running a lot. For me, this game, I'm very interested in Darrell Henderson, who's just under 6K. He's around that same David Johnson price range. He's not going to get quite the market share numbers, but I do believe he saw 20 carries to Malcolm Brown 7, and he was much more efficient on those carries. Don't believe we see Cam Akers back this week. I know the reports had him out a little bit longer than just this week. So I like Henderson. I just struggle to get excited about a game where the Giants are 13-point underdogs. And honestly, the Rams defense could just shred Daniel Jones, who is playing quite reckless, but not making these efficient splash plays that often. I think Henderson Rams defense makes some sense. You can certainly play the Rams receivers, but in a game where they're 13-point favorites and they've already been quite run heavy through 3 weeks, I struggle to get excited about anyone but Henderson, who I think is a solid pivot off of the chalky David Johnson.
Yeah, you pretty much nailed it there. You don't really want to play these Rams receivers. I mean, you can, but when they're going to be ahead by this much, they're probably just going to run the ball. And Henderson is someone who I do like as well at 5,800, had 20 attempts last week, 114 yards and a touchdown. He also had 3 targets as well. I think you can definitely go to him if Akers does not play. 5,800 is really cheap, and he's looking really good. So Henderson, 13-point favorites are going to most likely be running the ball a ton. I can definitely see that 20-plus carry upside for Henderson. And other than that, like you mentioned, the Rams defense should be fine if you do want to pay up for a defense, but I'm not interested in really anything from this Giants side of the ball.
Yeah, Henderson and move on for me. Let's look at our next game, another game with some quiet stacking potential. I mean, Josh Allen, what can you say? His first 3 games, despite entering the league and then entering this season as a guy who people described as fun. He was basically, you would couch your words around Allen because he was a good fantasy player and he had some highlight plays, but you would say he was fun or aggressive. You wouldn't say he was necessarily efficient or accurate. That script has entirely been flipped. He's like top 5 in passer rating, top, number 1 in EPA, total EPA as a quarterback. Every metric you look at, his receivers are getting separation. He's been efficient. QBR of 85 is top 5 as well. The dude has just been good. And although maybe you could say he's had some of the lighter matchups, the Raiders aren't putting up much resistance either this season. He's a 3-point favorite of 52.5-point total. I think the stacking options are incredibly obvious if John Brown is out. John Brown didn't practice at all today, I believe, with a calf injury. That cost him most of, if not all of the second half last week. You look at Cole Beasley and you look at Gabriel Davis, you double stack. I would at least be looking to, in large field tournaments, double stack Josh Allen with a minimum of Stephon Diggs and then one of Gabriel Davis, who went 4 for 481. And I believe he drew a long, kind of bogus, but he drew it, a long PI that helped set up their game winner. So stacking options are very obvious unless Tyler Kroft scores 2 touchdowns again, and then I throw away all my lineups. And on the other side, I think there are really 2 considerable plays, given that Henry Ruggs, don't know if he's been ruled out, but is quite unlikely to play, and Bryan Edwards has been ruled out. You look at Hunter Renfrow and you look at Darren Waller, and that's it. What are you doing with this game? Another game that I think I can use to pivot off of some of the more chalky spots. Josh Allen just not going to be garnering the same ownership in the same price range as guys like Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, or Russell Wilson.
You're right. He's not going to be as high owned, but he's still going to have that crazy upside. Like I'm a Josh Allen believer. 36 points last week, 37 in week 2, 33 in week 1. He has been absolutely fantastic. So Josh Allen is definitely somebody I really do like in tournaments for that upside. And like you mentioned, John Brown might not play. If not, that makes Diggs a very, very good play at 6,800. And then Gabriel Davis at 3,200 is going to be a smash play, a very, very cheap wide receiver if Brown is indeed out. And on the Raiders side, not interested in much, but Renfrow is someone you mentioned, 4,600 should be a good play. 9 targets last week. Depending on those injuries. And then Waller is someone I think he's second in tight end targets, getting a ton of targets throughout the 3 weeks here. 16 targets in week 2, favorable matchup against this Buffalo defense that's not really great against covering the tight end. But for me, Josh Allen, I like him a lot in tournaments. And Josh Allen Diggs stack sounds really good to me right now.
Yeah, I will keep going back to Lowell until it fails with Josh Allen. Didn't even love him coming into the season, but we have just seen a turnaround from him of epic proportions. I do kind of think that Hunter Renfrow is not awfully exciting, kind of gets this reputation as this svelte slot receiver. He had a handful of really long receptions last year, just breaking off these big plays. Could happen again when they're without their top 2 receivers, and I guess you could even say they're without their top 3 because Tyrell Williams didn't start the season at all. It was a shoulder injury, I think. So based on what we thought a month ago, they're without their top 3 receivers. It's really down to Waller and the running back Josh Jacobs and Renfrow. Waller coming in as the chalkiest tight end of the week as of right now, whereas Renfrow, I'm seeing sub 1% ownership. If he just scores both the touchdowns, Waller could even have a good game, but just bust because you need touchdowns to get there. I really like the leverage that gives you in a game that I already love, so I'll probably be significantly over the field on Hunter Renfrow, which might feel gross, but I'm doing it. Next, and I believe our last game, a game that is good, but expensive to tap into. Kansas City, 7-point favorites versus New England. Both of these teams have put up crazy points through 3 weeks, a 52.5-point total. My only problem with this game is that it is costly to get in on these Chiefs, as it always is and as they should be. But you're paying the most expensive tight end price to get Travis Kelce. You're paying one of the most expensive quarterback prices to get Patrick Mahomes. I think for me, This is a game I would rather just play 1 to 2 pieces of, use it as a secondary stack, and try and capture that the upside this game possesses, but hope that it condenses itself to one player as opposed to spreading out. Because if it does spread out, you need this game to hit essentially 60 plus points for all of for a lineup that has Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, Julian Edelman, and Patrick Mahomes. This game has to hit 60 plus points because although there would be a lot of touchdowns in a 54-point game, at their prices, you need more than just a lot of touchdowns. You need all of the touchdowns. So for me, I'm probably single stacking this game. I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a great way to do that because he has, just as a rushing threat, he has a bit of inverse correlation with his receiving options, like a Tyreek Hill. If he rushes one in, that's not one that goes to Tyreek Hill. So I don't mind him. You could run it back with Edelman, who's my preferred play on the other side because N'Keal Harry's ADOT is so low. He's basically playing this slant screen role that we've seen vintage Jarvis Landry do. Not too excited about that. Or you could even play Chiefs defense and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And we're seeing N'Keal Harry and Julian Edelman get quite high ownership because they're good values. They project well, but they're more of cash game plays and tournament. I don't know about fades. I don't think Edelman's a bad play. I will be off Harry in tournaments, and I think a great way to leverage that is this Chiefs defense, who absolutely shut down a quarterback in Lamar Jackson, who, if you had to draw a comparison to anyone in the NFL right now, it'd probably have to be Cam Newton. I guess you could argue Kyler Murray, but really they do have a 1 week sample last week of playing particularly well against that running style quarterback. If that happens again, I think Chiefs defense Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a very sneaky stack and a way to pivot off of the popularity of this game.
Yeah, I like that quite a bit. Probably same thing for me, just going to single stack this game. It is going to be higher owned. And there are some other plays I like. Of course, you can go Cam Newton at 6,400. He's definitely in play against this Chiefs defense. Patrick Mahomes is always in play each and every week. But yeah, the Chiefs defense at 3,200, that's not a bad price. They've been looking very, very good so far this year. I mean, maybe they're the real deal. And against a New England offense, it's pretty solid. But, as for me, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is pretty interesting at 6,400, way too cheap, I believe. That's way too cheap there. 20 attempts last week. He did have 6 targets, 5 receptions as well. So he's getting that 20-plus target upside on a very, very, very good Chiefs offense. I just don't, understand why he's priced so low. He has a ton of upside there. Tyreek Hill, 6,900 is not a bad play. And like you mentioned, Harry at 4,000 is really cheap. He just hasn't been able to really get anything going so far. But yeah, I'm not all that interested in this game due to the high ownership, due to me liking some other games a little bit more. I think you have the right call there with the Chiefs defense, probably a low-owned defense as well at 3,200. Just not all that interested in this game. Travis Kelce, 6,800 is a good play, but typically for me, I like paying down at tight end. Like Logan Thomas is going to be half that price and get a decent amount of targets as well. So for me, like you mentioned, Chiefs defense, maybe Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think Tyreek Hill is always in play as well.
Yeah, that's going to do it for the main slate. That is all. I think it was at 13, and then we lost Pittsburgh. So 12, I think, games on the main slate. Sounds like we are both just going to continue holding hands and praying that Josh Allen doesn't return to our priors of Josh Allen being, essentially what we've seen from Daniel Jones. That's it, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Good luck this week. Hopefully you were with Brady last week on the Tyler Lockett train, and hopefully we make some money on this Josh Allen train as long as it keeps on chugging. So for myself, at Kyle Tweets here on Twitter, for Brady at DFS_numbers, we will catch you next week at Football Diehards on the Strategy Show.